Apologies for the technical difficulties.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I know, like the hair
I'm
is
used
gonna
to dual screen too.
see the hair is going to make rotoscoping the background out interesting. Just saying.
Oh my.
All right. Hi everyone. Thank you so much. We had some technical difficulties, but thank you for joining us today. This is a hybrid event, and virtually first virtual only broadcast from the Challenger Center in Tallahassee, and this is part of my live series hosted by Jage Creative and Friends. And I'm so happy to have Diana here with me today. She has one of many talents. Like, she has several diversified, talented individual here, and I wanted her to tell me her story of how she ended up in Tallahassee. And every time I talk to her, it's always interesting. She works for GitHub. She works remotely full-time, and she didn't start she pretty much started in her career in tech, but I'm obviously going to ask her more questions to dive in. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Julia.
So first off, tell me about where you're from originally and then how you started in your career.
Yeah, certainly. So I am originally from the middle of nowhere, Georgia. And whenever I say the middle of nowhere, it is about as middle of nowhere as you can get without being in the Midwest somewhere. It's about an hour and a half from Jacksonville, hour and a half from Savannah, Macon, and Valdosta. So like literally if you want to go anywhere, it's an hour. So that's where I started. And I ended up, after graduating high school, I ended up going to a local community college where I got an associate's in physics. Because in the beginning, I wanted to go into either aviation through like being a pilot, or aviation through something along the lines of aerospace engineering. And as I kind of started going through that path, I really liked physics, and once I got my associates, I decided, hey, let's pursue a bachelor's. So I went to Valdosta, where I started with a BS in physics and was like, okay, this is maybe a bit much. Took a break, went into the workforce for a bit, and was like, I'm not jiving with this. I worked in a call center for a while, and I was like, it's okay, but not really my vibe. And that's whenever friends were like, hey, you've been kind of passionate about tech, but I never really thought of it as a career path. So at that point, I was like, okay, let's try that. So I went back to BSU for a computer science degree. And while doing that, I also ended up getting a job working at VSU as a student intern in the IT department. And that kind of started my pathway into tech. And now, over the past 8 years, I've worked in companies ranging from ISPs to financial service providers to retail automation and database as a service, and now finally here at GitHub.
And you actually, like, something brought you to Tallahassee. So was that part of your career path? This is something that you kind of wanted to do? Like, I want to go to a bigger town? Is that why?
To an extent, yes. What ended up happening was I had a break in jobs while I was in Valdosta, and I was job hunting, and I was originally looking out west, so kind of the Seattle, Portland area. And then I just started to say, well, Tallahassee's close, let's check there. And then I ended up getting a job at a company called Reliance Solutions. They actually just got bought out recently by a company, I believe it's Acumera. And that was my first job in Tallahassee. And at first I actually commuted for like the first month of that job. And then once I was able to, I ended up moving to Tallahassee and have been here now for about 4 years.
That's so awesome. And how we met was through Dummy Station. Like,
yes.
I don't think I would have met you otherwise because we're remote. Like, I run my business remotely, and you're a remote employee. one question, just because you brought it up, like for anyone who's considering, because there's a big demand for people in the tech world. Obviously, these bigger tech companies are laying off people, but the smaller tech companies are hiring. There's so many in Tallahassee that are trying to hire, but I think obviously there's a gap because people need to get qualified or be qualified, and there's just like, there's a huge demand for it, and there's a big learning curve. What would you recommend for people to get started if they didn't have a tech background or was considering it, even though they're from a completely different field?
Yeah, certainly. So to basically parrot a lot of the former speakers in the events this week, you can basically sum up most of their speeches with just do it.
Yes, pretty much.
And that is
It's
basically
true.
it. And really, if it can be something as simple as you taking a online hackathon class, or you going into a simple Udemy course in a language you're interested in, and just by simply doing things like that. For me, I'm not a programmer, so I work as a customer reliability engineer, which means I work with some of the largest customers at GitHub, and it's more of a technical support role. So if you're interested in something like a technical support role, whenever you encounter a problem, play around with it, explore it, try to dig down into the why that happened, not the how can I fix it.
Yeah.
So be more investigative in your analysis of issues that you come across, and that can kind of get you into that mindset of how can I solve this problem without only trying to solve the problem. Because a lot of technical support is also understanding why something happened, so that then you can both prevent it from happening in the future, and then also just get a better understanding of issues that can occur.
So did you take courses online too, or did you pretty much learn as you worked for some of these companies? And I know you worked for other companies in town too.
Yes, it's pretty much been mostly on the job. My first actual non-student tech position was at a small ISP up in Valdosta, and that's where I basically found my passion for networking. Networking is the kind of cornerstone of my background. It's the thing I'm most passionate about, and it's also just such a broad topic, because you can have things from your enterprise networks, your data center networks, to massive optical networks, which can get ridiculously complicated, where basically it's all about shoving as much data as you can through a single piece of glass. And that's its own field. That basically is a hybrid field of you get into physics, you get into engineering, you get into data science on how to properly keep the encoding of the data intact through the course of the fiber. So things like IT, it's not just one broad field, it's a lot of individual, really broad fields. So you kind of can go this shotgun approach where you look at everything, or you go more of a narrow focus and you say, I want to do programming, I want to do systems administration, I want to do networking. And you really just kind of choose what area you're interested in and then start learning that direction.
Yeah.
So like my big change in the way that I went to learning is I had a roommate who also worked with me at the ISP in Valdosta, and we ended up going on Craigslist, finding a bunch of used Cisco equipment. We bought a lot of used Cisco equipment, and then we just set up a home lab, and that's how we learned so much more about networking than we could learn from just the job, because we were then able to configure setups that customers had, configure theoretical setups that we thought might work, test them out, figure out why or why they wouldn't work, and just better improve our overall understanding.
That's so fascinating. And then, like, I know you also worked for Kokoda at one point too.
Yes.
And that was probably a smaller company at the time, and they've grown.
Yes, whenever I worked at Kokoda, I think we had just over 25 people.
Yeah.
I know recently they just moved into their fantastic new space. It's over
At Summit Park?
Yes,
Yeah.
over at Summit Park, and If you're ever go to a NAT 20 event, they occasionally hold those at Kikoda, and it's a wonderful building.
It's beautiful in there. And I think they were featured Inc. 5000 recently.
Yes.
So they're like one of the best tech companies in town. Definitely go check them out, and they're so generous with their space and having it open. Nat 20 is an awesome group too. So like so what was before GitHub?
Yeah, so you want me to work backwards?
Yeah.
Certainly.
Go for it.
So before joining GitHub, I was at MongoDB.
Right, yeah.
They are both a database company and then also a database as a service company through their Atlas platform.
Mm-hmm.
That was an amazing opportunity because I got to just learn so much about all the cloud providers, because I worked on the database as a service side in support. So I got to learn AWS, Azure, GCP, and I originally going into the role had a fairly good understanding of AWS, and all that job allowed me to do was expand my knowledge of both GCP and Azure. And really with how most tech companies are going, especially smaller ones, the cloud is such a pivotal part, because nowadays it's not really feasible for most small businesses to have servers that they maintain. You just both can't get the talent, and then also the capital cost of acquiring new hardware, especially in the server space, has risen so drastically. Whenever I bought my first server, I kind of piecemealed one together, where I bought a motherboard, bought a server chassis, bought all the hard drives. That all in cost me around $2,500. If I were to do that again today, I would be looking at upwards of $5,000 to $6,000. So that's just over the past 8 years, because I bought that server in 2014. And so just in that short time period, the initial entry cost to get that equipment has gone up so high that there is cost savings with it, but you're just better off using a cloud at that point. And the amazing thing is it's so flexible. Like, you can go so many different ways. And then again, we get into the broad breadth of IT, where it's not just a tiny thing.
Yeah, it's not just
lot.
fixing the printer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So many people view IT as just, hey, it's not working.
Yes.
And while yes, that is an aspect of IT,
Just
it's not.
restart your computer.
Okay, you will be amazed. You will be amazed at how many times that will fix a problem.
Yes.
Because all you have to do, all that does is just reload the configuration, and most of the time, something in the configuration is what changed that caused it to have an error.
Yeah.
That's why resetting it tends to make it work. The real fun thing is whenever resetting it doesn't fix it, because then you get to dive into actual issues and try to troubleshoot those, and that's where kind of that ability to explore in depth comes in.
My husband has a tech background, so I kind of have familiarity with some of the names and terms that you say, but like it's definitely over my head. But no, this is really cool, and I that's why I love doing this, because I love learning about people's stories, and especially highlighting people that are here in Tallahassee. So MongoDB was before GitHub.
Yes, and then before MongoDB, it was Diverse Computing.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they are located out Appalachian Parkway, just outside of Cap Circle. They do more law enforcement software. So think the public safety sector. That was a real interesting job, because that was my second systems administration job. MongoDB was support, so it's GitHub, but both Kikoda and Diverse Computing were actual systems administration jobs, where it was keeping the servers happy, getting new software, working with clients, that kind of role. So though both Kikoda and Diverse Computing were amazing roles to expand my knowledge of real world working database system, or not database systems, but data centers, where we have fleets of servers and hypervisors and all of these really complicated systems in a production setting. So whenever you're playing around in test environments, you don't really care. Like if you accidentally break something, it's a test environment, you're fine. But whenever you go onto a production system, especially whenever it has that warning of everything's being logged and we review these frequently, it adds an extra layer of anxiety, because in a way that's a great thing, because it makes you confirm what you're going to do in those environments. So in a way, anxiety in that space is both a great thing and also a great way to slow you down in what you're doing, because it's really easy to get into this mode of you want to solve a problem and you get solve-itis, where you want to solve it as fast as possible. And sometimes the best thing to do, take a little bit longer. Take a little bit longer, you'll see the problem better, and you'll better resolve the issue. So really, every job you can take in a tech space, not all jobs will be great. But if you frame it right and you go into the job with the willingness to learn, almost every job can be a way to get you to a better position eventually.
I love it, because I know we had our conversation before and we had talked about it, because I think one of the challenges for some of the small businesses, especially like those who don't have a tech person in their company, they don't know how to hire correctly, like the terminologies, the names, as you listed out some of these things, like what does that all mean? And then does my company really need it? Right now I'm thinking maybe the common problems of issues is cybersecurity, or how do I prevent anybody from hacking my business, and how do I keep my stuff safe, and cloud services and things like that. But I know some service providers, maybe, I don't know exactly, but obviously I have a small business and I don't need a lot of those services, but for some of the bigger companies, they need those kinds of services. So, dive into that, like what would you recommend to employers on how to attract talent like you at an early stage, maybe from early grads, who are looking for a job, they can't find a job, but there are people hiring here.
Yeah, certainly. So especially locally, advertise. Like, put your position everywhere. Not necessarily advertise in the sense of paying for advertisement for your positions, but more in the sense of
Be out there.
Be out there.
Yeah.
Like, utilize resources like DOMI, utilize resources like the FSU Career Center,
Right.
or FAMU Career Center. Like, utilize these career centers to get your message out. Utilize job fairs, because the biggest problem I hear in Tallahassee is, I didn't know that was a thing. And if
We
all
don't
your
know some of these tech companies exist.
exactly, and
that's a big problem.
and
Yeah.
what you have to do is you have to go beyond your own career page, your own career site. Don't rely on SEO to get your careers out there, because
Indeed. Don't rely on Indeed.
Don't rely on Indeed either. You have to approach it as a much broader topic. You can't just rely on one or two platforms. You basically have to spread it everywhere and as broadly as you can, but then also use word of mouth. Encourage your employees to refer people, even if they might not be the best candidate. Some of those candidates who don't look good on paper can turn out to be some of the best employees you can have, because a lot of times, like I know whenever I was getting started, there have been multiple times in my path through tech where I was just like, I'm done. Like, I can't really apply anywhere. Most HR departments will drop you if you don't have a bachelor's degree.
Right.
And I only have an associate's. I never
Yeah.
finished my bachelor's at Valdosta State. So you run into these situations where it's a double-edged sword, where the companies that are putting out the resources and getting knowledge and allowing graduates and other tech people to apply are also the ones filtering them out.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, I don't have candidates to hire.
Mm-hmm.
You do, you're just filtering them out unnecessarily. And that's where good technical interviews come in. Like, actually doing interviews not from just a knowledge perspective, but also doing them from a theory perspective. Because testing someone's theory and logic behind doing things like troubleshooting will net you a much better candidate than on pure knowledge alone. Because you can cram a book. We've done it for college exams all the time. But you can't really cram a theoretical problem, because there's so many ways you can craft theoretical problems that won't be replicated each time, and everyone will have a different way to solve it. So that's the other thing, is just diversify your hiring strategy.
Yes. No, I love this. And we're going to have time for people to ask questions if you're interested. And I didn't realize I'd have such a nice audience. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you all.
Yeah. And does anyone have anything in mind? If you already, is there anything buzzing right now? You're welcome to, grab our attention. And we've had a live debate about this, not between us, but with someone else, about there's the unconventional employee, and then there's the conventional, like you said, you didn't have that kind of traditional route to get to where you are right now. Very awesome position there at GitHub. But like, tech companies are more open to hiring people without degrees.
Yes. It's been a very interesting journey. Both the smaller companies I've worked for and the larger companies I've worked for tend to be more willing to hire those without degrees. It's the in-between, the just above a small business and just below a large multinational, where you get to this situation where they are so fixated on degrees. Even some of the large multinationals have that problem, where they get super fixated on, do you have a degree? And it's basically a weeding criteria for them. Because you got to also remember, a lot of these giant tech companies, they put out a position, they get 10,000 applicants right away.
Right.
For them, they have to filter. They can't get around that.
Yeah. And it's like a 3-stage hiring process. You have to do 3 interviews.
3 or more.
Plus, yeah.
I know I have friends who have worked for other companies, and they would have 6, 7, 10 interviews. So especially with the larger companies, that's kind of needed. You kind of need to have that to help narrow your candidate pool to a selectable amount.
Right.
But if you're a small business, you kind of don't have that option. You should still do
Yeah.
you should still do a lot of this interviewing, just because you still need to get a judge for their skills, their
it's almost like the character, and like you said, how they think. The other thing too that's important to me is persistence, how they, to solve problems, you can't give up. You have to really stick with the issue and focus on it. So yeah, there's definitely soft skills too that you have to consider. They say hire slow, fire fast. And I would say the smarter companies do hire slowly. They have to interview and everything. So how did you find these companies? Did they find you?
So initially, a lot of it was through people I knew who worked there. That's how I found out they were hiring. So my first 3 or 4 jobs was all through people I knew. For example, the ISP in Valdosta, as well as I worked for a financial services company in Valdosta as well. Both of those, I knew people who worked there. And they were like, hey, we're hiring this position, you should apply. And then my first job here with Reliant, that was through, I believe, Indeed. It was either Indeed or LinkedIn. Then Kikoda, I met Matt and Sam through Domi. And
oh, cool.
That's kind of how we got to that point, because they were having a networking problem. And I was like, hey, do you want help with that? I might be able to help you. And so they brought me in for an interview, and it basically turned into troubleshooting their networking issue for the interview. And then they were like, hey.
That's great. That's a great strategy. I like that.
Yeah, and then sometimes you can do that. Just offer assistance to those who need it. That can be a pathway to get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
You might not get hired through that method, but now you've made a friend, you've networked.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever they do need that role, there you go. You now have a proven capacity to help them, and they have a need, so that could lead to you getting hired.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just go out and help everyone, because some people will abuse that.
Yeah.
But having that willingness to be helpful towards others is very crucial. And it's kind of like what you talked about with soft skills. You need kind of that rapport with people to be able to get into a lot of these smaller businesses, because they're going to be, it's kind of a double-edged sword. They're both more strict and less strict with their hiring. And the kind of thing that you want for the smaller businesses is very much more of that, much more independence, much more self-driven. Whereas with some of the bigger companies, you still need that, but you don't need it as much. And then whenever I got my job at Diverse, that was also that was a double-edged sword. So I knew somebody there. I ended up meeting somebody from Diverse at my first career fair whenever I was working for Reliant. And then they ended up messaging me and saying, hey, we have a systems administration position open, would you be interested? I'm like, yes. So then I started working with Lester.
Yeah, he's great.
Yes, Lester is wonderful. And I started working with Lester, ended up getting a position there. Their whole team is amazing and wonderful.
Yeah.
And then that's where it gets interesting. So both MongoDB and GitHub, they reached out to me through LinkedIn. So that's another.
I know, I heard a lot of HR people hate LinkedIn.
Yeah. But it's also, it's kind of the same way that some of the speakers have talked about using Sales Navigator to hunt down potential leads. You can also do that as an HR team looking for potential clients, or a recruiting team looking for potential clients.
Right.
So don't discount that. That is also a method to do it. And the other interesting aspect of that is that a lot of the times now, there's really 3 ways that companies contact me to try to recruit me. It's email, LinkedIn, and the occasional phone call. But the phone call, unless you leave me a voicemail, you are not getting me to answer the phone.
That's pretty aggressive.
Yeah. I've only ever had that happen once, and I think it was because a local recruiting firm, back whenever I was using them, still had my number and was trying to get a hold of me. And that happens, like, especially whenever you're starting out, putting yourself out there through these consulting firms. Consulting jobs can be really amazing. They have trade-offs. You have to weigh your risk and what you're willing to do. But they can be a great way to get connections with some of these tech companies, because they also use these firms in town to try to hire talent. One of my first interviews here in town was at a data storage company. They were looking for network engineers, and basically the feedback I got was, you're a bit too advanced for what we're looking for. And I found that kind of funny, because it's one of those situations where if you find somebody who is more advanced,
that's good.
That's good. Like, you should actually probably hire them. In the same way, if you find somebody who's not what you're looking for, but they have passion and spirit to learn and better themselves, that also can be a really great hire, even if they're not where you need them to be. Because somebody that you can train and teach your stack to is going to be a much better employee in the long run than you hunting down somebody to perfectly fit the role that you want.
I love that, because it's really true. It's like you feel more loyal to somebody who's invested time in you and educate you and build you up, and especially with the companies that invest in personal development. And and you feel like you can respect them more. Anyways, I'm really glad you brought that up. And I know we're cutting, we're getting close to the end now. Does anyone have any questions? Edward, I know with your tech background you probably do.
I'm trying.
She's so thorough, isn't she?
No, very good.
She's so good. Yeah. No, and like I bumped into her when I met her at like one of the socials at Domi. I've been a coworker at Domi from the beginning when it opened, and I just keep meeting amazing people, and there's no way I would have met her. And so when you told me you worked for GitHub, I was like, what are you doing here? You could be remote and you could be in Europe or something, but what made you stay here? Like, people ask me, what made you move from California to here? But honestly, like, it does grow on you. Tallahassee grows on you. The community is amazing. We've met amazing people here this week during Tallahassee Startup Week, and we can see that there's so much talent. There is so much talent that comes through the universities here, and you're a great example too. So if you wanted to say anything else, did you want to mention, we do have a question.
Yes, so I'm sure in your job search, you've applied for multiple jobs at a time. I'm sure at some point you probably got multiple offers at a time. What factors ranked priority in which one you chose? Because there are a lot of tech companies that are hiring right now, and anyone who is in tech is probably getting a couple of offers from different companies. So for you personally, what makes you choose one company over another, potentially?
Yeah, certainly. Just to reiterate the question for those online, the question is basically, whenever you get multiple offers, how do you justify choosing one of those offers over the other? Okay, so I actually had that happen. Whenever I got the job at Kikoda, I was actually also interviewing for a position at FSU FAMU College of Engineering. They were looking for a systems administrator as well. So what ended up happening was I basically got both offers, and the big reason I chose Kikoda over the College of Engineering was this is a position to do a migration, and if you know anything about migrations, they end. And there wasn't really solid guidance as to what happened after that end period. So there was a lot more uncertainty with that job. And that kind of goes into where I talked about the consulting firms. That is where you have to manage your own risk and your own ambitions. Because if, say for example, you're single, you're in a good position, you're much better to take risk. If you have a family that you need to support, maybe tone the risk down a little bit. But even if you are in that situation, just understanding that you know everything going on, and ask the employers who are fighting over you basically at that point. Ask clarifying questions. Try to find what may happen, what won't happen, and go from there.
Did team culture also play a factor?
It actually, at that point in time, it didn't. But back at that point in time, I was still vying as hard as I could to get out of technical support. Mm-hmm. And so it was less of a criteria for my choosing. But I will say now, especially after working for both MongoDB and GitHub, the employee resource groups that both of the organizations have are wonderful. They are so helpful in both getting you to embrace your best potential and also getting stories of others who have had amazing journeys as well.
That's cool. So what is that like? Is there niche groups, or is it, tell me more about this. Maybe it's something that others can implement for their companies? Yeah,
so it's very much a thing of for the most part, most employee resource groups are driven through either a diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategy or through employee organization. So MongoDB, for example, had a group called UGT, Underrepresented Genders in Tech, and that was basically a way for people of minority representation who are programmers in support, work in basically IT, to get together and share their stories. And resources like that are very, very important to both help build your culture and also maintain your culture.
Yeah.
Because it leads to this situation where you're not sure. Now you have resources to go ask who also have been in that situation. So you can run into situations where you're talking to a staff or senior person in your position that you can then lean on to say, hey, what's going on? Or like at MongoDB, there was a mentor-mentee program where you could both either be a mentor or look for a mentor. And that is also super crucial for those starting out, especially the newer people, the ones who are straight out of college or this is their second or third tech position. So being able to offer them advice is very critical. And you can then help them lower their both imposter syndrome and then also their fear associated with, am I doing good enough? So it's really just communication. Having options and ways to communicate is crucial.
Question.
So you have a great job at GitHub, but my question is, are you working on an idea on your own, like a startup maybe, or just share with us if you got something?
If you're allowed to say something like that.
Yeah. If you want to share it and something to keep it on the TL.
This is being streamed on LinkedIn, owned by Microsoft, who then owns GitHub.
Yeah, for clarity, it is streamed on LinkedIn. Microsoft owns both GitHub and LinkedIn.
She cleared this interview.
Yes.
Through corporate.
So there are a lot of my ideas stem around high upfront investment costs, low return on investment. So if you know anything about that metric, it's basically a quadrant system. You have low cost of entry, high cost of entry, low return on investment, high return on investment. All your investors, they want this down here. They want the low cost of entry, high ROI. Where I'm over here in the bottom right, people don't want to touch that area because there's a lot more risk. But in my opinion, that's kind of where the more community enhancing projects are, because community, if you're trying to better your community, you're probably not going to make exponential profit growth. You may eventually, but it's going to be a while. And really that's where a lot of my ventures and endeavors are aimed towards, is building communities, because kind of as we talked about in this session, people just don't know what's out there. And that's kind of the key, is to spread awareness through online events, social networking, just regular networking, and trying to show people that there are resources out there. There are other people like you out there that you can both lean on and get advice from. And that's kind of where most of my endeavors fall into.
So 2 questions, because I know we're finishing up soon. Do you plan on staying in Tallahassee for a while? I know you want to travel.
Yes, basically, really it's up in the air. I would like to eventually get a house here, because I feel like Tallahassee is kind of that sweet spot of where you can travel. It's not too expensive to live here, so you're not throwing away tons of money at rent or tons of money towards everyday expenses. And as long as that's good, and as long as other opportunities don't present themselves elsewhere, probably. So that's kind of where I'll leave that.
I know you. Oh, were you raising?
Yeah, I got one more question.
Yeah.
I know you're a gamer, so.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too.
What is your thoughts on the Activision Blizzard acquisition? Do you think that's going to be
Way above my pay grade.
He wasn't clear on things that she's not talking about. I have no idea what that is about, but no, yeah. So what I was gonna ask too, like, I know you do a lot of things for fun too. You have several hobbies.
Yes.
So if you wanted to talk about that, like, what do you like doing for fun?
Yeah. So mainly the biggest ones are, I love to travel when I can. I love hiking outdoors. Very nice. Gets me away from computers. It's just funny because basically I work on a computer, get off, deal with computers, babysit my servers, and then sleep. And it's funny though, but I also do like to just randomly get out into the woods, go camping, disconnect. Oh, mostly disconnect. I still have my phone.
Right?
Yeah.
Can't live without it.
So,
And then you also stream while you game.
yes,
Fun.
I do stream. It's been really interesting making my home office space and streaming space into the same space. Really challenging as far as figuring out how to switch all the devices between the two computers so they can share monitors and keyboards.
What's the channel called? So for anyone, any gamers out there, I know we had someone comment, Alyssa Seymour said, I love that advice. That was earlier in the interview and I happened to just see that. But thanks for joining us online. So what's your channel on YouTube?
So it's actually my username. So for the longest time I had this username. It's in LEET, so it's XN4P4LM, which just says X Napalm if you read it normally. And that is a byproduct of changing my username whenever I was in high school and just leaving it ever since.
That reminds me of Elon Musk's son's name, like some XD40 something, like some plane. He said it was inspired by some plane, like Falcon plane. Anyways, no, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's my username. The great thing about it is because it's so unique, I now have it everywhere. So it's a great thing, but also it means you have one way to find me everywhere. So kind of good brand building.
Yeah, and I know you want to grow it.
Yeah.
You want to do it, and then you do photography.
Yes.
You want to get into that. So you have so many interests, and but yeah, no, I love seeing you around. Thank you so much for supporting Startup Week Tallahassee. I'm glad our interview landed this week at the same time, and I love seeing you in town and at the events. If you want anyone to connect with you, you're on LinkedIn as
Yes,
well?
I'm on LinkedIn. At the moment, if you search Diana plus GitHub Tallahassee, that will be the only result. So, probably the easiest way at the moment, but who knows?
If you want to end with any thoughts?
Yeah, if you have any thoughts about like you wanting to get into a tech field, feel free to connect with me and I would be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let's give her a hand. And thank you for those who are watching. I'm most likely as a recording. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to be on the show. I interview entrepreneurs, influencers, creative people in North Florida area, and I also have a line